Let my people go so that they can worship me in the wilderness. Wilderness worship. And what does worship mean? Worth-ship. That's where the word comes from. It's an Old English word. When they're in the wilderness, if they're hungry, what's God do? Manna, quail. They learn what God's worth. When they're thirsty, the rock, Paul said, the rock that was Christ, was struck, living water. When their enemies threaten them, God says, just stand still and watch this. See? So in the wilderness, God's people learn what He's worth. They learn what He's worth. And true worship is a celebration of the worth of God. What has God done in your life that's worth celebrating? See? What's God done in your life that's worth remembering? Same thing when Jesus goes into the wilderness. He demonstrates that He already knows the worth of His Father, because every time He's confronted by Satan, He quotes the Bible, Leviticus of all books. He quotes Leviticus. But He demonstrates in the wilderness that He knows the worth of His Father. See, true worship always begins in the wilderness. Okay? A couple more. Now this is going to start to get picky, so don't fade on me. This is something we have in the Lament Psalms. It's called the formula of remembrance. The formula of remembrance. And we see this in Psalm 42. We see this in Psalm 68. It's all over. You'll see it. And the form is usually these things I remember. And what happens is the lamenter sees no hope or sees no relief. And what he'll do, and it's usually David who uses this formula, what he'll do is say, I remember when you parted the Red Sea for the ancestors. I remember when you showed up in the wilderness for them. Now, how about now? How about showing up now? See? And one of the things I love about this formula is that Mary, Jesus' mother, when she gets the word from Gabriel that she's going to have Jesus, when she sings her little song there in Luke, it's not a lament, but she has a formula of remembrance. She remembers that God has been faithful to the ancestors, see? She remembers in categories of slavery that she comes from a slave people. And she says, behold the slave of the master. When Gabriel tells her she's going to have this baby, King James says handmaiden of the Lord, but it's not really very good. Literally, it's I'm the slave of the master. I come from an enslaved people, a people whose identity was in slavery. I mean, why does Israel, God says, why should you show compassion to the Gentiles? God says, because you were slaves in Israel. I mean, you were slaves in Egypt. You were slaves in Egypt. So that's the basis for your compassion. So Mary has this formula of remembrance, and we'll see that in a couple of the laments that we'll look at. And I'm going to apply all this, so don't worry. I can feel your anxiety level going up, or maybe it's just my anxiety level. Okay, a couple more categories. Presence with a capital P, so it means the presence of God. Lament teaches us, this is really important, lament teaches us that in prayer, the things we ask for are almost never what we really need. The things you ask for in prayer are almost never really what you need. So let's be honest with each other. I mean, you might as well be honest with God. I mean, He's omniscient. I mean, forget spirituality. It's just dumb to not be honest with somebody who knows everything. Okay, so if you're like me and you're not very spiritual, it's just stupid to hide things from God. So let's be honest. How many of your prayers have been answered the way you asked them lately? Literally. I've two people in my life dying right now. My mother's bleeding internally right now, and my best friend is dying of pancreatic cancer right now. And I've laid hands on. I've claimed all the verses. I know all the things to claim, and they're both going to die this week. Now, we've got three choices that I can think of. First choice, there is no God. Okay, I'm not prepared to go there. Second choice, there is a God and He doesn't care whether my mother and my best friend die or not. I'm not prepared to go there either because of number 5. We'll get that in a minute. Third option, there is a God who cares and He's doing something that I don't totally understand. I don't completely understand what he's doing. That's my, number 3 is my option. I have a very good friend from Knoxville, Tennessee. Alec Woodhull is his name. Alec is a pastor, amazing pastor, very Christ-like man. Some years ago, about 15 years ago, he was T-boned by a drunk driver and paralyzed from the neck down in the hospital. He knows his Bible and he knows the lament literature, so he's given the Lord, he's given him this. Why? How long? Why have you done this to me? See? And Alec is a Presbyterian, so let me make this clear. This kind of thing doesn't often happen to Presbyterians. I go to a Presbyterian church. They wouldn't claim me, but so I'm making fun of my own people. But as he is lamenting, he senses someone come in the room, and the immediacy of this presence is so real, he thinks it's the nurse. I mean, someone came in the room. I don't know what you do with this theologically. But after a period of yelling and saying, hey, give me some water, who's there, and hearing no response, he realizes, and again, I don't know what you do with this, he realizes it's the presence of Jesus. Now, I know Jesus is always present. That's part of his nature. He can't not be present. I understand all that. But I think that there's something to be said for having an experience of the immediacy of Jesus' presence. Sometimes in fact, I pray for this almost constantly. Just make me aware of your presence, And when I pray for you, I'll almost always pray, Lord, make her unusually aware of your presence today. I think that's a good thing to ask for. God is pleased, I think, to answer that prayer. Well, anyway, he experiences this immediacy of the presence of Jesus in the room. And whenever you come close to God in prayer in that way, time sort of thins out. You know how that happens? And Alex said he didn't know if it was 5 minutes or 5 hours, but he was just in this place where he's really experiencing the Lord. And what happened is he sensed the immediacy of that presence leaving. And he said, then I started to lament. And he said, what I heard myself shouting was, you don't have to heal me, just don't leave me. Okay? You don't have to heal me, just don't leave me. And isn't it interesting that the deepest desire of God, the thing that God wants the most, is the thing that we need the most? Okay? And so Alex said he learned in that hotel or in that hospital room that he needed God's presence more than he needed His provision. And most of our prayers, let's face it, are provision prayers. And that's okay. He invites us to make, no, I'm not trying to make you feel guilty. He invites us to cast those burdens on Him. Keep on praying that those who have cancer are going to be healed, please, right? Understand that. But also understand that His deepest desire is this business of intimacy and being with us. And especially with someone who's terminal and who is a believer, I think God, my friend Denny, I think God wants to be with him. And He's going to take him to Himself. So, but lament teaches us this. And we'll see that in the laments, God showing up is the answer. Okay, Job doesn't get his children back in the end of the book of Job. He gets God back. Right? He pleads and screams and asks for answers as he laments all through the central section of the book, all through the wilderness section of the book of Job. But in the end, he gets God. God shows up. That's the answer. Himself. God doesn't give us answers most of the time. Jesus is not an answer man. I mean, if you look at the Gospels, people say He's a great teacher. Honestly, He wasn't such a great teacher because He didn't like to answer questions. Right? He usually answered questions with harder questions, which is just what God does in Job. Job asks all these questions. God shows up. Perfect opportunity for him to explain himself. Right? And God just asks a bunch of more questions, and they're way harder than Job's questions.